My ex and I were lovers from our university days. The first time we met was during our second lecture as freshmen, and we sat beside each other. We were both young teenagers with heads full of dreams, and I always wanted a partner I could share my dreams and life with. I know this might sound childish, but what really attracted me to my ex-wife was her handwriting. At first glance, they looked like they were well crafted by an artist, and I was stunned to see someone my age with such perfect handwriting. She, on the other hand, was an absolute beauty. I didn't just fall in love with her handwriting that day. I fell in love with her ocean blue eyes, blonde hair tumbling over her shoulders, and a smile that could light up a small city. Typically, I wasn't the kind of guy who made friends quickly. I was more of the reserved guy who waited for friends to come to me, and we built a relationship from there. But I had to make an exception with her. We started talking in the lecture hall that day, and with time, we became seat buddies, and we were always sitting next to each other. It was great to make a new friend in college, and we got along very well. Since we were both freshmen and didn't know our colleagues or have any friends, we decided to stick together until we became inseparable. My ex-wife and I became best friends, and we didn't start dating until our third year. The reason I delayed in asking her out was that we were so close, and I was afraid she would turn me down if I did, but I didn't know I was making a mistake because other guys were beginning to ask her out, and she would tell me about them. At that point, I could not hold it in anymore, and I figured it was better to be turned down than to shy away, so I asked her out, and she said yes. As soon as she said yes, I asked her to move in with me, and she did, and our love story officially began. I loved her more than I loved myself. Even as a student who was only earning little from my part-time job, I did everything to make her happy. We went to parties and concerts, and we had fun together. Almost all of our colleagues knew we were dating, and they always found us together. Every time we stepped out together, people could easily tell we were together because of how I looked after her, and some would even ask how long we had been dating because they loved what they saw. Aside from being fun and pleasure partners, we were reading partners and helped each other until we graduated from the university. Our parents knew we were together and respected our decision to live with each other. After we graduated from the university, I was lucky to get a good-paying job, but my ex-wife wasn't. We both applied to the same places, but for some reason, she kept getting rejection emails, which took its toll on her. I even helped her write and edit her resume, but she wouldn't get hired if she got to the interview level. We thought it was normal for that to happen, and it would only be for a couple of months, so we went ahead and got married. The wedding was beautiful, but it was small, and we had support from friends and family. After we got married, we moved out of the studio apartment we both lived in and rented a bigger 2-room apartment. I was the one who single-handedly paid rent and took care of all the bills and even groceries. I understood that she wasn't working then and didn't want to do one of those hourly menial jobs, so she wouldn't get comfortable with it, and I understood that. And since we were not financially stable, we agreed to only have kids once we both had jobs that could sustain us and a child. Even with my new job, we still spent quality time with each other, since the job allowed me to work 2 weeks on site and 2 weeks remotely. Despite my responsibility at home, I didn't stop making her feel special. On my way back from work, I'd still stop to get her flowers, shop for her, buy her a piece of new jewelry or bag, or even get her chocolates. I did all of that because I didn't want her to feel the impact of not having a job yet, and I also wanted her to know that I was happy doing all of the things I did, even though it meant I'd have nothing left to save at the end of the month. 1 year passed, and my ex-wife still did not get the kind of job she wanted, but she kept applying to different organizations. It was in the 11th month that she began to do the small menial jobs that didn't pay well, and she reluctantly agreed to do that after I had talked to her over and over. Even with her 1 month of working, I didn't let her contribute a penny to house bills. I preferred that she kept the money for herself, so she could get whatever she wanted and be happy. We were always happy and doing things together at home. We cooked, had our bath, and even went for evening walks and roadside ice cream hunting together. Our bond grew stronger, but one day, I discovered something that broke my heart. That day, I was at home working, and she was doing the day shift at a fancy restaurant she worked for when she called me, and asked me to help her find her physical resume so she could use it to apply for a job opening as soon as she returned home. I confirmed the job opening to be accurate, and knowing how much our lives would change if she got a job at that organization, I left what I was doing and went to help her find her resume. She had instructed me that I would find it in the first document holder in a box she kept her documents in, but after going through all the pages in that document folder, I couldn't find her resume, and because of that, I had to take out all of the document holders and go through them one after the other. Immediately, I carried the third document holder to search for her resume. Small-sized notes and cards fell out of it, and I was curious to find out what they were. I felt my chest tighten and my lower tummy churn by merely reading them. The small-sized notes and cards were exchanged between my ex-wife and one of our professors, who she was really fond of back in the university. It turned out they had been having an affair for years, and no one knew about it, and I didn't even suspect anything between them. I was very disappointed, and I really wanted it to be that I was having a bad dream. I found it difficult to believe that my ex-wife was also doing the professor while we were together, and it made sense because I kept wondering why we were always treating infections when she was my only partner. Before I packed her document holders back into the box, I took some of the notes and cards and told her I couldn't find her resume. I knew she would be back home soon, so I asked her if I could edit and print a new resume for her before she returned home, and she agreed. She sent me her laptop password shortly after our call, and I used the opportunity to go through her social media accounts since she linked them to her laptop. I found the chats between her and our professor on Instagram, and I was even more heartbroken. I was already boiling in anger, so I plotted my own revenge. I knew she trusted me and wouldn't bother going through the resume, so I edited it so she could fail her job interview. Then I took pictures of her chat with our former professor on my phone and forwarded both pictures of their chats and the notes to her university. When she got home that evening, I didn't tell her anything. I just acted like I had fallen sick so I could be alone. After she submitted her resume and got an email that she was not fit for the job, I told her what I had done, and she thought I was joking. It was until I mentioned her affair with the professor that she knew I wasn't kidding. She fell on her knees and started to beg me, but she betrayed me, and I could not forgive her. She tried to explain that she did it for our grades, but what I read did not sound like that, so there was no way I was buying that. I kicked her out of the house that evening and notified her parents about what she had done. I already contacted a lawyer to process our divorce papers, and we divorced when the papers were ready. As for our professor, he knew such a relationship was prohibited in our university, but he broke the rule. The university fired him, so he and my ex-wife lost in the end. She tried to come back and beg me. She even sent me multiple messages on Facebook and Instagram, but I blocked her afterward and warned her not to show up at my apartment again or else she would regret it, and she never showed up again. Sadly, we were only married for 1 year, but I'm glad I found out that early because finding out later would have hurt me more. I am fine now and focusing more on my career and personal development. I was deeply hurt and betrayed. It would take a while before I entered another relationship. OP, you did the right thing by kicking her out of your house and divorcing her. Even if she claims she had an affair with your professor to help your whole class get good grades, it's still not a justification for her to cheat on you like that. It only means that she would do the same thing if she had another opportunity to have an affair with someone else to get whatever she wanted. What she did is called cheating, and it's not acceptable. To even think they were still communicating with each other after you both got married. I'm glad you didn't let her manipulate you with her lies and tears. It's a sign that you're not a weak man, and I am very proud of you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. My wife and I were married for 4 years. Our relationship years in marriage were just perfect. Each time I remember how my wife broke my trust, it still hurts me because I remember how much we went through and overcame to get to the level we were, yet she forgot about everything and destroyed our happy home and lives. The first time I met my wife, the stars aligned in the right order for me that day, and something pushed me to go grocery shopping in the middle of the weekday off from work, unlike my usual weekend shopping. While I was in the store taking the things I needed, I noticed an average height, light-skinned girl walk down the row I was shopping on, and she smiled at me. I returned the smile out of shyness, but I focused more on what I needed and left her in that row. A few minutes later, I was done shopping, but before I took the things to the cashier to pay for them, I noticed she was already driving out, and I didn't think much about her. About 2 minutes' drive from the store, I saw her standing on the road with the hood of her car open, and I didn't need a psychic to tell me that she was having car issues. Out of kindness, I pulled over and asked if I could help. Thankfully, she was having a minor battery issue, and it was definitely something I could help with. When we were done fixing her car, we talked a bit, and she willingly gave me her number without me asking, and we said goodbyes. 1 week passed, and I had forgotten about her and her number. It wasn't until the day I was looking for an old friend's contact that I saw her name saved. I remembered her instantly and felt terrible for not calling her after days. Without wasting time, I called her and introduced myself, then we fixed a date. She was a bit uptight at first, but after much persuasion and my begging her to let me make things right, she agreed to our date. Our first date wasn't at a fancy restaurant or an eatery like the regular dates. She insisted that if we were meeting, it would have to be at a popular park. We both knew, and I agreed. Later that evening, we met and talked about ourselves, and we ended up having more evening picnics and park dates after that. When we met, we were both freshly out of college and lived at our parents' house. I was fortunate to get retained at an organization I interned at, and the pay was not really good, but it was okay to keep things going until I got a good job. My wife, on the other hand, worked 3 jobs simultaneously because her mom was sick, and she needed all the money she could get to buy medication and take care of things at the house. Her father worked too, but he was inconsistent and spent all his money on alcohol. He didn't contribute to the house, so the responsibility fell on my wife and her younger brother. Eventually, we got married because I didn't think I could live without her. We loved each other so much, and we were always together. Even when she was mourning, I was there for her emotionally, physically, and otherwise. I supported her as usual, and we continued our lives together after her mom passed. I always treated her like my special woman, and I gifted her whenever I could afford to. In fact, 2 months after her mother's burial, I took her on a 1-week vacation so she could take her mind off everything, and it worked. Luckily for us, shortly after we got married, she got employed at one of her dream organizations, and her job was soft. Her pay was great, 3 times better than what I earned, and I was so happy for her. I felt like God was rewarding her for all her hard work when her mother was alive. But sadly, the first 1.5 years of her doing her new job didn't come with changes for us. I was still the one taking care of all the bills at home, and that was because she had so much debts to settle. After she settled most of the debts she racked up in the past years, we began to see changes. All that while, she neither bought herself clothes nor anything new. She mainly wore clothes from thrift stores and fairly used shoes and bags. When she got that month's salary, the first thing she did was get herself a new phone and some clothes. She also settled all her credit card debts, which was such a relief for us. Since I was more of a tech person, the first thing she did when she came home that day was to give me her new phone to help set it up, and I was glad to do that. She needed me to transfer all of her photos and messages from her old phone to her new phone, and that was how I stumbled on her iCloud account. Somehow, one of the names she saved on her phone piqued my interest. It was the name she used to call me when we started dating, but as we grew older together, she stopped calling me that. The name had sent her message through an app one didn't even know about, and they had been communicating frequently, even more than we did. I read some of their messages, and I was forced to read them all to satisfy my curiosity. To my greatest shock, I discovered that my wife was having an affair with one of her coworkers, and they had been dating for the past 8 months. I also found that the evenings she told me she was working overtime at the office were clearly a lie. They had been going on fancy dates, and even took pictures of themselves when they were at it. The most shocking part was when I found out that my wife and her lover were planning for her to divorce me, so she could move in with him while her lover's wife and kids could return to his parents' house. I was very disappointed and betrayed, and I could not believe she had been playing me the whole while, even though she knew I genuinely loved her. The funny thing was, I was planning to get her an expensive gift that week to appreciate and encourage her to work harder, but she ruined everything. I was so mad that I forwarded that to my phone as evidence, then I got her HR's email address, and anonymously sent everything to them. I knew very well that their company was against coworkers dating, and I knew they would get fired. Well, it worked. She came home the next day in tears, claiming that her company decided to cut down on staff, and she was fired. To her surprise, instead of consoling her like she expected, I laughed and told her I was responsible for everything, but she didn't understand me. When I showed her their conversation from my phone, she started crying again and asked me to forgive her. She said that she did it because I was too dull and nice. She also said it was because I did everything she wanted without complaint, and she wanted something different and someone who would give her a tough time. I was devastated, angry, and in tears. I kicked her out of my house, and shortly after that, we divorced. I didn't want anything to do with her or her family anymore, and if she didn't leave when I asked her to, maybe I would have hit her, and it would put me in a more terrible state. Before she left, I reminded her that her late mother would be so disappointed in her, and hearing that made her cry even more. I also blocked her on all the social media platforms we shared, and I warned her brother to not come close to my house, or he'd be arrested. Finally, after staying at that house for 4 months, I moved to a different location because I could not handle people constantly asking me of her. I also heard she went to confront her lover, thinking the wife would divorce him so she could move in with him, but he embarrassed her and his wife even hit her. Most times, I think she played me from the beginning, but I hate to admit that I was used to it. I wasted a greater part of my life and finances for nothing, and I hope she is miserable wherever she is. I am slowly moving on, but I know it will take a while, and I am in no rush. OP, when people cheat, there are usually signs, but you were blinded by love. You did what you had to do because she didn't deserve you. She had a good man, but she didn't appreciate you or all of your efforts, and went ahead and cheated on you. She even lied about why she was fired from work, and I can't help but think about the other times she lied to you. I hope she is miserable, and hope you will be able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Hi everyone. For anonymity, I'll be using fake names for this post. My wife Kara, 29 female, and I were married for 3 years, and we were 2 love peas in a pod. When Kara and I first met, I didn't think I would spend my life with another woman apart from her. I had this certainty about her, and from first sight, I knew she was the one for me. Also, the increase in my heartbeat confirmed that as I approached her to speak to her, the first time I saw Kara was at a distant friend's birthday, which I was dragged to attend by another friend. She was sitting with a group of friends, and they were all chatting loudly and drinking. It was a late-night party, and there was so much to drink, but I didn't drink more than a glass, because I wanted to be in the right state of mind for work the following day. The thing is, I used to be a timid person, and approaching ladies, gorgeous ladies like Kara, was a big deal for me. My friend, who dragged me to the party, noticed that I could not take my eyes off her since we arrived there, and without asking if I wanted to, he ordered the waiter to send her an expensive bottle of champagne and tell her it was from me. After it was delivered, I noticed that all her friends at her table turned in my direction, and they all smiled simultaneously. Then she smiled, raised her glass, and mouthed, "Thank you." Almost immediately, my friend pulled me from the chair I sat on and asked me to go and say hi to her. He knew I had been single for more than 4 years, and he wanted me to maximize my once-in-a-blue-moon pull of attraction, I felt. He knew I wouldn't like the idea, but he kept insisting, and after persuading and trying to convince me for nearly 15 minutes, I summoned the courage, walked to her table, and asked if we could talk privately. Her friends excused her, and we sat at a different table. We didn't say a lot that night because I was stunned by her beauty, and to be honest, it had been years since I talked to a woman about something that wasn't work-related. I worked as a programmer at a prominent tech firm in our city, and considered anything other than work a waste of my time. We introduced ourselves to each other, and I found out she was currently doing her PhD, even without saying so much. I'm sure my constant blushes and ear-to-ear grin had given me out that night. When we delved into her work life, I discovered she worked part-time as a junior writer/editor at a publishing company, and I believed her because she sounded intelligent, and there was something about the way she spoke. After our little chit-chat that night, we exchanged contacts, and I left the party because I had to rest for a few hours before going to work the following morning. We had our first official date about a week later because I was caught in the web of deadlines, and she claimed she was busy too. Our first date was more fun than the night we met. We talked about so many things, and I loved that she was very free-spirited. She smiled and laughed wholeheartedly, and it was evident that she enjoyed our conversation and our time together. After our first date, we hung out more often and visited each other's apartments. Before we started dating, she would come over to my place on weekends, and we would try cooking a meal together from a cookbook, baking pastries with strange names, or we would just do something fun. As weeks passed, we got closer to each other, and I could not go to bed without thinking about her every night. I saw all the signs that convinced me she was the one for me, and I kept imagining what it would feel like to spend the rest of my life with Kara. As friends, I took her shopping and got her flowers and the things I knew she loved. I knew she loved me too, and I also knew she wanted me to ask her out. Her body language said it all, and eventually I did, and she said yes. For me, money was not a problem. I was well paid, and most importantly, I loved a spoiled Kara because it made me happy. We ended up dating for only 13 months, and we got married. We had a beachside wedding. Kara wanted that since childhood, and I was happy to do that. The wedding was small because we wanted to use part of the money for our vacation, and we did that. The first 2 years of our marriage were heaven on earth. Kara and I were much more in love with each other than when we were dating. Our bond grew stronger, and we literally did everything together. In fact, I only had breakfast, lunch, or dinner if I had it with Kara. We would eat together in the morning before she left for work. Lunch would be at a restaurant close to her office, and we always had dinner together when she returned home. Even when she had to spend extra time in the office, I always waited for her to come home so we could eat together. Aside from eating together, we had the rule of going to bed early so we could bond, get intimate, and talk about random things before sleeping off. Already in our first year of marriage, I had been promoted to a senior programmer in the firm I worked for, and my work became 100% remote unless I chose to go to the office. Kara was also done with her PhD, and now working full-time as a writer/editor in her publishing company, which also came with an increased workload. Unfortunately, a year after Kara started working as a full-time editor for the publishing company, she got laid off. The company was cutting down on staff, and Kara also had to go. This was in the 3rd year of our marriage, which changed many things between us. Being sacked took its mental toll on her, and she slowly became depressed. We no longer talked like we used to or did our usual weekend cooking tradition. She became a shadow of herself, and it hurt me to see her that way. I even offered to double what she was paid at the publishing company, hoping it would brighten up her mood or cheer her up, but it didn't. She told me she wasn't working there because of the money, but because it was always her dream to work as an editor in that particular organization. Despite shuffling our house and her parents' house, Kara was still not herself, and I was becoming more concerned. It wasn't until a friend of mine recommended that she talk to a therapist, and that was when we began to see changes. Slowly, she became more active and the vibrant, cheerful woman I used to know. She met with her therapist 3 times a week, and I even insisted that she made it 4 times a week because I was impressed with the results I saw. I wanted her to be fully back to how she used to be, so bad that I didn't notice something else happening between her and the therapist. I was cleaning the house to surprise her the day I found out. She had gone to her parents' house the previous day, and I didn't want her to come home and clean. I even went grocery shopping to make her favorite meal and got scented candles to make her dinner special. I cooked first so I could clean up at once. I was in our room cleaning and folding clothes in the wardrobe when my hands touched a small journal that was partly tucked under a pile of clothes. I pulled the journal and realized it was from her therapist because it had the company's insignia on it. I know I should not have read it, but I was curious about what she had been journaling. To my greatest surprise, I found out Kara and her therapist were having an affair, and she journaled every bit of it. I was speechless and heartbroken. I went through the journal again to be sure of what I had read, and the content didn't change. Kara was cheating on me, and she was unapologetic about it. She even wrote about how her therapist was better in bed than me. I've got to admit, I was hurt and cried like a baby that day, and everything I planned for us was ruined. I laid on our bed for hours, and when it dawned on me that what had been done, I wanted them to pay for hurting me. I took pictures of the journal and filed a complaint to the therapist's office. I even took the journal with me in case they had doubts, and they were disappointed when they read it. When Kara came home that day, I told her I dropped by the therapist's office, and she was surprised. When she asked why I did, I dropped the journal on the table, and she began to cry. Immediately she started begging me, but there was no way I would listen. Reading her journal broke my heart, and I could not forget all I had read. I kicked her out of the house and threw her stuff on the porch. She was so embarrassed and could not move, so I called her parents and asked them to come and get her off my property. In addition, I mailed the photocopy pages of the journal to Kara's grandmother, who was very fond of me, and she was taken out of her grandmother's will. Her parents begged me to not tell her grandmother, but that was my ultimate revenge plan. Ultimately, we got divorced and her therapist had his license revoked. It was good that we didn't have kids yet, so it was easier for me to move on with my life. Kara became depressed and more miserable after we divorced, and I am glad she had to live with her parents' disappointment and shame. She called the house several times to beg me to take her back, but I wanted nothing to do with her. The last time Kara came, she met another woman and attacked her. I was so mad that I called the cops on her, and after that, I filed for a restraining order, and that was the last time I saw her. As for the woman she saw, we broke up because I was still hurting, and I have not completely moved on, but I'm glad I'm making progress. OP, you handled the situation maturely and gave her a taste of her own medicine. Despite being a good husband and trying to support your wife, she still chose to cheat on you with her therapist. I know the things you read in a journal must have broken your heart, but you should understand that humans are full of disappointment, no matter how close we are to them. It's sad things ended that way, but you should be glad it did. She probably hates you for ruining her life and taking her out of the grandmother's will, but revenge is best served cold. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. The first time my wife and I met was at a small restaurant near my workplace. That day, I went to have lunch with one of my colleagues, and I could not ignore her sitting alone. I was used to approaching girls and sweeping them off their feet with my sweet lines, and I thought I would get lucky with my wife. But she completed the line I wanted to use on her before I did. I was impressed to see that, but it also meant she would be a tough nut to crack. And like I had predicted, she was. Instead of blushing and smiling like other women, she locked her eyes with mine, faked a smile, and continued eating her food. That was my first time being ignored like that by a woman, and it was embarrassing because everyone's eye was on us. Still, overall, I found her attitude very charming and different from the rest of the women I had met. I kept talking to her without getting a response, and finally, after I tried so much, she smiled. When she smiled genuinely that time, I knew I had broken through her high walls, and with a snap of a finger, we were talking and laughing together. The conversation we had felt like we had known each other for a long time flowed freely and naturally. Despite being complete strangers, we chatted like best friends who had not seen each other in a while, and at the end of my 30-minute break, we exchanged contacts and Facebook handles. There was something I was looking out for, and when I saw that, I asked her out. I was convinced we were a perfect fit, and I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with my ex-girlfriends. Of course, she said yes, and we became inseparable. We even wore matching outfits occasionally because she thought it was sweet. We dated for 9 months before we married, and though my friends thought I was moving too fast, I didn't think there was a better time to officially make her mine. About 2 weeks before our wedding, I leased a bigger apartment, and we moved in when we returned from our honeymoon. The first year of our marriage was splendid. I had never been deeply in love like I was with my wife, so I did anything I could to make her smile every day. Before we got married, I noticed that my wife was fond of my stepbrother, and she often talked about him when we returned from our family hangout. My stepbrother was a gym instructor, and as a result of that, he was heavily built. He was also handsome, and the kind of guy ladies love to be around. In the past, I had female friends who abandoned me the moment they met my stepbrother, and this mostly had to do with his looks. Since my wife had 3 older brothers and was used to being around guys, I believed she also saw him as her brother. I never suspected that her talking about his looks, and how well built he looked, was her subtly telling me that she was into him. I was even glad that she had a way of always bringing him into her conversations, as well as her brothers. This was because I wanted our families to be one big happy family, and I didn't want her shutting out my family members, including my stepbrother. I had been with him since I was 13 and he was 17, and I didn't want anyone to come between the bond we shared. On my 28th birthday, my wife decided to throw a surprise birthday party for me at home, and she tricked me into coming home early from work that day. I had to take the family emergency excuse to leave work early, only to go home to a packed house. My parents, stepbrother, and some of my friends were there, and my wife's parents and her older brother were there too. The surprise worked, and I was so happy to see everyone at my house that it was a small party with a lot to eat and drink. By this time, our marriage was already 1 year old, and we didn't have any children yet. After eating and drinking, everyone decided to hang around, since they were mostly family members and close friends. Also, it was pouring heavily outside, and no one had the excuse of going to work the next day since it was a Saturday. Everyone in the room was an adult, and in no time, we were arguing about politics and our economic crisis. The conversation grew intense as we all tried to outtalk one another, and that was when I noticed my wife was not with us. I didn't even notice when she left because she was sitting behind me, so I asked around for her. Everyone said they had not seen her until her mom casually said she had seen her walk down the corridor with my stepbrother. At first, I didn't want to go and look for them, but after some minutes, and I didn't see them or hear their voices, I excused myself. Walking down the corridor, I paid attention in case I heard voices, but I didn't hear a sound. When I didn't hear a sound, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. As I approached our room, I began to hear soft muffled moans, and my heart nearly dropped in my stomach. I walked closer to our room, pressed my ear against the door, and could not believe what I heard. I was devastated and heartbroken, but I had to keep myself together. A part of me wanted to go in there and give them the beatings of their lives, but I knew it would only complicate things. So, I slowly pushed the door open, and luckily, they didn't hear a creak because they were so busy. I turned on my phone video recorder, recorded them, and quietly returned to the living room. About 15 minutes later, my stepbrother returned first, and some minutes later, she came in. She changed her clothes and took her bath, so no one would suspect anything. When we were complete, I asked if everyone wanted to see a movie, and they all agreed. Then I told my wife to go and make popcorn for everyone. While she was making the popcorn, I transferred the video I had recorded to my flash drive, so I could plug it into my large-screen television. We were settled as soon as the popcorn was shared with everyone. I played the video, and though they did not understand at first, their mouths eventually fell when they watched the video. My wife and stepbrother were the most surprised ones, and they could not say anything or defend themselves. They sat there speechless. Our parents were shocked and disappointed, and none of them could say anything. They were all ashamed and expected me to react in a certain way, but I didn't. Immediately after the video ended, I asked my wife and stepbrother if they liked the movie, but they couldn't maintain eye contact. Funnily enough, it stopped pouring at the same time, but no one made an attempt to leave. When my wife could not bear the silence anymore, she started crying and begging. Her mom was so angry that she yelled at her, but she didn't stop. I went into our room and packed her things so she could leave with her parents, and eventually she did. No one dared beg on her behalf, not even her parents. My stepbrother left before my parents, but what he had done caused a rift between us. Everyone left that day with their heads buried in shame, especially my wife, and there's no need to ask if I divorced her because I did. It was even worse because I never spoke to her again. I didn't only cut ties with her, I did with my stepbrother too, and things never remained the same in my family. It's been 2 years now, and I'm finally able to tell this story because I have been able to let go. Though it hurt a lot, and I still don't think she deserved forgiveness, I had to do it for myself. I met another woman, and we're taking things one step at a time. OP, why would you keep hurting for a woman who cheated on you with your stepbrother, not minding that the whole family was in your house? That's pure evil and disrespect. Both of them were toxic, and you did the right thing by cutting ties with them. That was the height of betrayal, and none of them deserves to be in your life. I do not think she would have only cheated on you with your stepbrother. Maybe she would have done the same with other attractive men, so consider this good riddance of taking out the trash. I hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife, 37, was a business partner with her father. They were both extremely wealthy because of this, which made me, 34, wealthy too. Since I married into her family, her father and I became very close, and he would show me a lot of business-related activities, so I understood them better. After 6 years of marriage, my wife started to distance herself from me. As part of her responsibilities, she would drive to clients' houses to deliver products to them and discuss upgrades. Obviously, being a well-spoken, friendly, and attractive woman helped business. My wife took this helping business notion a little too far one day. She started to seem particularly distant from me, and excited, in the weeks when she was scheduled to visit one particular client. I decided to confide in her dad about how I felt and what I noticed. He encouraged me to follow her discreetly to the client's house. I thought this was a sneaky answer from a normally straightforward guy, but I took his advice. I didn't know it was going to become the worst day of my life. I parked down the street from the house in question and watched her go in. The customer's name was Doug. According to our customer information, he wasn't married. Would that stop him from taking advantage of a married woman? Probably not. My mind was already picturing horrible scenarios, and it wasn't far off from what I was going to find. I walked up to the front door after 15 minutes. I thought about knocking, but decided not to, keeping in mind the word sneaky. I opened the front door slowly and peeked inside, but mostly listened. I could hear faint noises coming from the second floor. It didn't sound like any business conversation was taking place. I walked upstairs. My heart was racing, and I started recording on my phone. As I got closer to one particular door, I could hear them going at it. I opened the door and found my wife having sex with Doug. It was my worst nightmare coming true. My wife immediately turned to look at who was barging in on them, and started screaming when she saw it was me. She tried to shield her body from the camera, but it was too late. It saw everything. She screamed for me to stop recording and let her get clothes on. I continued recording as I left Doug's house and got in my car. It recorded my sobs and angry words as I drove to my father-in-law's because I didn't know where else to go. When I got there, my father-in-law acted like a real dad to me. He listened intently as I told him what happened. He watched the video, but only to the point where he could hear moaning. He believed everything I told him, and better yet, he said he was on my side. 20 minutes later, my wife arrived there too. She walked straight into the kitchen, finding us at the dining room table. Before she even sat down, her father asked her how long she'd been seeing Doug. I looked at him in surprise, just like she did, because I wasn't expecting him to ask that question. I thought for sure she couldn't have done this more than once. She tried to say it was only this one time, but her dad told her he looked at the travel logs. He knew she was going to Doug's house way more often than necessary for the past 11 months. My jaw dropped, and I looked at her expectantly. She didn't know what to say. She tried to speak and protect her image, but it didn't make sense. At one point, it sounded like she was defending her actions by claiming it would help business. Her father offered no sympathy when he told her she was fired. She let out a weird noise of shock and started stammering. She wanted to keep her job, but what could she possibly say? I had her on video sleeping with Doug, and it was clear this wasn't the only time she did it. Besides the betrayal she dealt me, her father told her this was not the behavior he expected from his business partner or daughter. The real whammy that made my wife plead forgiveness was when he announced that he was going to disown her. It didn't matter how much she apologized or what she said, her father's mind was made up. She couldn't live in our marital home, because her father's name was on it and he didn't want her there, and she couldn't live at his house either. She became homeless, living in her Audi. A nice car, but not a home. Once, when she called her dad crying, he told her she had 11 months, the duration of the affair, to stop and reconsider what she was doing. Because she didn't, he finds her despicable. He finished by saying I was lucky I found out the truth and got away from her. Her father gave me a choice. I could live in the marital home, and it would become mine, or I could move in with him. He owned a mansion that was about the size of 2 houses put together. The 2 halves were connected by one long hallway. I knew I would have privacy, but most of all, I considered him family and needed his emotional support. I decided I would continue to live in the marital home, but would still visit his place from time to time. He also offered me a partnership for the family business he runs, which I gladly accepted. I've been working with him for 7 years now since all this happened. Since then, I was also able to meet a new amazing woman who is now my wife. We have 2 kids together, and life couldn't be any better. As for my ex, her outlook on life isn't too great. I can tell because of her pessimistic posts on Facebook and the occasional bitter message she sends me. I just show them to my wife, and we have a good laugh about it. She may have some money still, but what she doesn't have is anyone around her that loves or cares for her as I did. Wow. Up. This is one crazy story. It sounds to me like your ex started to believe she had it all and wanted more. She probably started to think she deserved more attention, and that there was no better way or time to get it than with a client. Obviously, this proved to be a very stupid and selfish decision that would cost her the dearest relationships in her life and her career. You noticed right away when her behavior changed, and you asked your father-in-law for advice. I think you made lots of wise decisions through this nerve-wracking experience. She was left with nothing and no one to care for her. Let this be a lesson to keep your ego under control, and never assume for 1 second that sneaking around to achieve something is a good idea. I am so glad to hear that you have a new family and a close relationship with your adoptive father. Thank you for sharing your experience and positive outcome. I wish you the best of luck in life. Up. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 35, and I, 38, have 2 sons. At the time this story begins, Eddie is already 11 years old, and his younger brother Teddy is 7. One seemingly ordinary morning, my wife rushed off to work early. I prepared breakfast for my boys, and we had a fun, light-hearted morning chat, like we always do before school. The car ride to school was a quiet, and it seemed like Eddie had something on his mind. I tried asking him if anything was wrong, but he said no. I dropped them off as usual and went to work. After work, I picked them up from school at the request of my wife. She texted me, saying she had to stay at work late for a meeting. I hated when this happened, but was used to it by now. She stayed late at meetings at least 4 times each month for the past 10 years. When we got home, I started cooking dinner for my sons while they sat at the table and did homework. Eddie still seemed like he had something on his mind, but he did his homework and asked me questions about it. We ate dinner together, and they told me about their day at school. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but this was the last time I would have a conversation and dinner with my sons before discovering life-changing news. We were about to clear the table when Eddie said he had something to tell me. His voice cracked, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Teddy looked uncomfortable and asked Eddie if he was sure he should tell me about it. I assured them they could tell me anything. Eddie proceeded to tell me that Mommy told them I wasn't their real dad, that a few times every month, Mom would take them to visit their real dad. My jaw dropped. I asked him who their real dad was and if I knew him. He said yes, I knew him. It was Uncle Kevin. I could not move for a few seconds. Both the boys asked if I was okay, if I was mad, and what I was going to do. When I snapped out of it, I told them both that I loved them. I told them that according to me, I would always be their dad. They were happy with that and helped me clean up dinner. They went off to play, and I contemplated what I was going to do. My own brother fathered my children. How could this have happened? I couldn't believe it and I couldn't prove it. I told the boys to wait until a specific day to tell Mommy that they told me I wasn't their daddy. They agreed and seemed to forget about it. I laid on the couch watching the boys play until my wife got home. As soon as she did, I told her I wasn't feeling well and had to go to sleep. I laid in bed awake until my wife put the boys to bed. When she got in bed with me, she tried to see if I was sleeping, and I pretended to be. When she was asleep, I unlocked her phone. My heart was racing because I never checked her phone before, and I kept thinking she was going to wake up. I found a messaging app tucked into the last page of an app folder called Utilities. It was like she didn't want anyone to find it on her phone. One of her messaging conversations was with Kevin. It was like reading an everyday conversation between a romantic couple, talking about their day, when they were going to meet next, how the boys were, and stuff like that. Mixed into that were messages like, I love you, I consider you to be my husband. The children are lucky to know their real father. I will marry you when the time is right. And then there were sexual messages. Apparently, whenever my wife and brother wanted to have sex, my wife would simply tell me that she had to work late. That was all the proof I needed. Right here, under my nose on her phone. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for believing my wife and family were perfect and honorable. I took screenshots of their conversations and sent it to myself. Revenge had no choice but to be sweet. The next day, I hired a PI and a lawyer. I already had some proof, but it had to be undeniable. The lawyer informed me that I could receive alimony from my ex, keep my house, and sue my brother for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. A DNA test was done, quickly, I might add, on the boys, and it was determined that the DNA was slightly off from mine. A more exact match was likely to be found in my brother's DNA. Over the next month, a PI followed my wife. It was hard for me to behave normally during this time, but it helped to pretend that my son never told me the secret. At the end of the month, the PI sent me all he captured. There were 42 pictures of my wife, children, and brother. They were all behaving like a family at the park, at his house, and out to dinner. It was the weirdest, most heartbreaking thing to see. There were also pictures of my wife and brother through his bedroom window. The PI must have climbed a tree, and that's what I call dedication. The pictures were explicit. Now that I had all the proof I needed, it was time for my son to tell his mom that I knew the truth. I reminded him to tell her and Uncle Kevin next time they had a visit. 4 days later, my wife left with the kids under the pretext that they were going to visit my wife's mom. I've always hated her, but only because she always hated me. She probably wouldn't ever accept that her daughter conceived children with her husband's brother and passed them off as his own. They were gone for 30 minutes before they returned home. It was just enough time for them to arrive at Kevin's, only for Eddie to tell them that I knew the truth and race back home. It was too late though. I already changed the locks and put a note on the front door. It read, "It's time for the 3 of you to move in with Kevin. Divorce papers and court summons will be arriving there for Mommy and Daddy." My wife banged on the door and cried. It bothered me that it upset her so much. She chose my brother over me by sleeping with him, having his children, and maintaining a secret relationship with him for a very long time. Not only that, but she coached the boys not to tell me anything about it. Even though she sat by the front door crying for an absurdly long time, I had no desire to go out there and discuss anything with her. Eventually, Kevin arrived to pick them all up. They lived with him through the divorce proceedings and court hearings. I kept my house and won alimony payments from my wife. I didn't have to pay child support, and I won in court against my brother. He was ordered to pay me a very large sum of money for sleeping with my wife and ruining our marriage. After I became a wealthy bachelor, my ex's relationship with Kevin fell apart. It must have been different living together with the boys 24/7. The stress of going to court and losing a lot of money probably didn't help anything either. After just 1 year, my ex moved out of Kevin's house and in her mom's house. Throughout that year, and even afterward, my ex would text me at least once a day asking how I was or telling me she was sorry. I still got to visit with the boys, and I know they appreciated it, but it was nothing compared to how we used to be together. My ex could see the difference, and she blamed herself for it, rightly so. It's been 2 years since all of this happened, and the boys show resentment towards their mother for changing who their dad is. She can hardly stand the guilt, but what choice does she have? She continues raising them at her mom's house and has yet to return to the dating scene. My brother doesn't speak to me, but I know he regrets what he's done because my dad told me so. I just started dating another woman, and I have a good feeling about her. She has 1 daughter and wants to have more children. She's compassionate, kind, and honest. I know that even if she doesn't become my wife, there is always hope for a bright future. Wow, OP, I am so sorry your wife did this to you. She knowingly went behind your back early on in marriage and had your brother's children. This isn't a story you hear every day, but unfortunately, it does happen. I'm glad to hear you have your dad to talk to, but for the most part, it seems you made smart decisions on your own. You took the time to figure out how to proceed. The things you set into motion helped you to make the cleanest break. It's lucky your wife didn't try to frame you for anything or plot to kill you. This actually happens in the world today. I'm so sorry about what happened to you and hope you are able to heal from this. My wife, 33, was an expert shopper. It helps that her grandmother and mother were very materialistic people while keeping a budget. She would hunt for the perfect sale, which is why I, 37, didn't usually jump up to go with her because she could be out for 6 hours or more. She would go out once a week, every Saturday, leaving the house by 6 a.m. She'd go to Saturday's market, then go to the mall, eat lunch, and probably shop more. We were married for 8 years, and the whole time she was in the habit of doing this. She took our 5-year-old daughter with her sometimes. My wife was a consistent light in my life, and I did not know she didn't deserve my trust. She started taking our daughter less and less often, leaving the house without waking her up or giving her the choice. I asked her why, and she said she could get back sooner without bringing her along because a lot of the time, she would start to complain and get tired long before my wife was ready to come back home. I suppose that was a reasonable explanation, but my daughter and I were both bummed because she enjoyed those trips with her mom. Our daughter actually started asking her each time if she could go with her, and she'd say no each time. She'd do something else with her the next day, or bring home something nice for her, but it wasn't the same. I let it go for a while, but eventually, I felt like I had to say something. I confronted her and told her she needed to take her with her that Saturday. She was not happy. I couldn't believe how inconvenient it was for her. She started to accept it and actually did follow through, but that Sunday, she went out alone. Usually, we all had family time and practiced meditation. Our girl always turned it into a game of peeking without getting caught. When the wife got back, she was really happy, like everything was fine. Then my daughter asked a question that led to the discovery of what was really going on. She asked her mom if she met the man with the puppet today. My wife forced a laugh and said no, he's only at the market on Saturdays. I asked who this was, and before my wife responded, our daughter said he was the man Manny kissed yesterday. I looked at her with wide eyes. She knew we had to talk. I excused myself to another room and waited for my wife to set up our daughter with toys before joining me. I quizzed her until she was blue in the face, but she couldn't convince me her lies were true. She tried telling me our daughter was talking about something else, but I knew her speaking capabilities were pretty accurate. She even looked at my wife like she was going to be in trouble with Daddy. She knew it was wrong, and she wanted me to know, so my wife eventually came clean. She said he was a nice guy that she got close to over the years she'd been going to the market. He liked her more than friends, and she didn't want to break his heart, so she started giving him kisses. I didn't think there was any way she could believe this was okay. I told her she betrayed my trust by doing this, even by being friends with this guy without telling me. I'd like to know who she's involved with, even if only for safety's sake. Now I was suddenly aware of a guy she'd gotten to know for years, introduced to her daughter, and kissed. I looked her straight in the eye and asked her if she ever slept with this man or anyone else. She blushed hard, looked away, and told me no. How much more obvious it could have been that she was lying to me. I stared at her, but she only tried asking if we could leave the room now, and I said no. I told her to tell me the truth because her whole body looked like she was lying. Her mouth got really dry, and she started to dry heave. She excused herself to her bathroom and threw up. I told her she needed to get it off her shoulders so she could feel better, but she pretended not to have anything to say. I told her I didn't want her to go to Saturday's market anymore, and she lost it. She said this was one of her greatest joys in life, and I told her that she spoiled it for herself because she started kissing an older guy. I wondered if she said older to try to get me to let it go like I'd picture an old lonely man. I wasn't a fool, so for a whole month, she didn't go anywhere over the weekend. Finally, she made an excuse to go out, but she took her daughter with her to help convince me she wasn't up to no good. They'd come home with groceries or other stuff that proved they weren't at Saturday's market. I hated that this had become an issue between us now. Every time she left, I wondered if she was seeing Mr. Kisser. On the first day, she didn't offer to take our daughter. I followed her. She didn't go to Saturday's market, but she did go to someone's house. Before I got confirmation, I knew this was AP's house. I could feel it in my bones. It was like my wife's energy and emotion were contagious to me. I knocked on his front door after my wife went inside. AP answered it, and I asked him why I saw my wife just come inside. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I pictured this guy meeting my daughter. He looked young and confused, but before he could ask me anything, I asked if he was the puppet guy at Saturday's market. He covered his mouth for a second and asked me if I was her husband. I said yes and yelled my wife's name. She came out, and he told her to leave. Then he told me she introduced herself as a widower. I felt like my heart stopped beating permanently, and I was only surviving off air and my still blood. My wife came rushing out like she had a right to be mad, rushing past me. I followed her. She frantically tried to get in her car, but I grabbed her keys from her and ran to my car, locking the doors. She watched helplessly as I took her house key off before giving them back. She told her parents I kicked her out for no reason, so they let her stay with them and arranged to have a truck come get her stuff. They came over to visit with our daughter and asked me what really happened. I told them the truth, and they must have made my wife's life at their house a living hell because every day she told me she hated me for telling them what happened. She moved out in just 5 weeks, opting to take turns sleeping on different friends' couches rather than stay under their roof. The divorce went in my favor, and my wife is at least partially involved with our daughter. OP, it sounds like you came out on top of this experience, taking what you could learn from it and tossing the rest. Don't look back, and like you said, find the happiness and hope in every day you have to be alive and make choices. Choose to eat healthy, spend time with yourself, loved ones, work out to keep your body fit, and do what you love. Work on those habits you haven't thought of as sabotaging your life's progress. Expect nothing, and accept everything you get in life with a grateful heart. Her kissing him like it was okay shows she did not have the maturity or level of thinking required to have a long-lasting, sacred relationship. It's much worse that she introduced her daughter to this outsider and herself as a widower. I wish you the best of luck moving forward. Now let's get into our second story for today. I, 34 male, was dating my fiancée, 32, for 3 years before I proposed. She grew up in a very sheltered household, so I was the first man she dated and slept with. We grew up in the country away from it all, so we felt old-fashioned compared to how a lot of people live their lives, but that's how we liked it. Our families were proud, and there wasn't any drama. After she said yes, we started looking for a house to buy. It figures that the first house we look at is being shown by an extremely attractive man, and I say that as heterosexually as possible. I wasn't worried at first. I thought my wife to be loved and respected me, but when I saw the way she looked at this stranger, it was like she saw all the future possibilities if she married him instead. She asked him lots of questions about his personal life and seemed completely intrigued that life brought them together. I felt left in the dust. This couldn't have been all in my head. She wasn't just being friendly. When we left the house tour, I asked her what that was all about, and she played dumb. She acted like I didn't just see her flirting with this guy, like her life depended on it. I told her what I saw, and she said I must be an extremely jealous person to have seen something that wasn't happening. Well, I told her we weren't buying that house because I didn't like that guy, and I wasn't comfortable with her seeing him ever again. Since that day, she started asking me more questions about her appearance and what my goals were in life. I think she started wondering if I was good enough to be with her. She started talking about how great it would be to make as much money as a realtor and to be able to be dressed up and just show houses seemed so easy. I told her I didn't want her to work at the same realty place as that guy. Little did I know, she was already texting him and applied to the company. 2 weeks later, she told me she was hired as a bank teller. She started going to work each day, and I didn't even go to the bank she was supposedly working at until a week after she started. I later on figured out that she wasn't there. I called her to see where she was, and she answered in a cheery voice, but when I told her I was looking for her at the bank, she panicked. She started stuttering and saying she was out to lunch, but I told her not to lie to me. I said I already went inside, and no one knew who she was. She was speechless. She finally said I had to promise not to be mad, and she told me she actually became a realtor. Of course, she was working at the realty place. I told her not to. Then, before I even admitted how mad I was, she told me we were invited to AP's house for dinner, the man that showed us the first house. I felt like I was losing my fiancé, and there was nothing I could do but play along. She swore they were only friends, and I didn't have any concrete proof otherwise. I wouldn't be able to divorce her without knowing I wasn't jumping to conclusions, so we went to his house. It was a mansion, and it made me sick. There was another couple invited over, so at least it wasn't just the 3 of us, but he mostly spoke to my wife all night long. When I couldn't hold it anymore, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back out, they were gone. I asked the other couple where they went, and they said outside, but they didn't look certain. I went outside and started speed walking around the house to find them, but I couldn't. I started yelling like a crazy person, and felt like my woman shouldn't have put me in this situation. When I went back inside, I must have looked panicked. I think the girl felt bad for me because she said she saw them go upstairs. I took 3 steps at a time and found that only one bedroom door was locked. I banged on it, demanding to see my fiancé, and it was about 30 seconds until he opened the door. All he said was he was sorry old habits die hard when it comes to locking the door, but a few things crumbled his lie to pieces. First off, he had my fiancé's shade of lipstick on his lips. Her face was bright red, and she was trying to casually stand and hold her wine glass like she wasn't just caught in the act. AP called for the other couple as if he was upset with them for failing to guard the stairs like he asked, but it turned out they left. I walked into the and sniffed around, even smelling my fiancé's neck. She held her breath, said I was being weird, and asked me if we could go back downstairs now. I ignored her and continued looking for clues. She stammered and said he was just showing her the space in his walk-in closets. I looked into her shameful eyes and asked how she had the nerve to lie to me, disobey me, and sleep with the guy I wanted her to avoid. At that moment, I knew she wasn't worth my commitment, as if all the things leading up to this weren't fishy enough. I told her she wasn't the hot stuff she thought she was, and she deserved to live a meaningless life without the sacred relationship between a man and a woman that I tried to have with her. AP was super quiet and awkward. He looked completely different from the confident selling man my fiancé was so infatuated with. I got in his terrified face and yelled that I should beat him to a pulp for taking my woman from me. He was so scared of that happening that he already called the police to request an officer's presence. I left before they got there. AP didn't realize that by doing that, he provided me with a police report I obtained a copy of, where they each admitted they were having an affair, and I caught them. I was able to use this to publicly shame them. They became the faces of sleazy salespersons you didn't want to trust around your own spouse. They lost their jobs and family support while I dodged a lifelong mistake. It still freaks me out that she started an affair with the first attractive man she came in contact with as an engaged woman. OP, I am so glad you didn't marry this girl. She was obviously not ready to commit to you for the rest of her life. It seems to me she never had to face temptation before this. When she realized just how big the world was, her ego grew with it, while her morals all but disappeared. If she really was having an identity crisis, or didn't think she was ready to be married, or even thought she needed time to explore the world on her own, she should have communicated her feelings to you. No matter how hard it is for someone to have that talk with another person, it's necessary. It's a part of growth, learning responsibility, and empathy for others. You would hate to be cheated on more than dumped, so do the hard thing and have the talk. You might be surprised what someone is willing to do to work on themselves or make things better. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife, 41, and I, 46, were married for 18 years when our sex life ran out of steam. We had twins that were grown and attending college. When they moved out, I thought for sure our sex life was going to get a boost. It did for a month, but then having sex anywhere in the house at any time got boring. We read online that taking a friend vacation without your spouse is a good way to miss each other and crave intimacy. Friendly flirting can also help fuel the craving your partner has for you. I was skeptical of this, but it was the first time in a while I saw my wife so excited to do something. We started making arrangements for our separate vacations. For some reason, my wife and her friends decided to go to Colorado. On their tour schedule was the town where my wife grew up. As far as I knew, my wife didn't have a very positive childhood. I was surprised she wanted to go there and without me. I decided my friends and I would go to Wyoming. I always wanted to visit Yellowstone National Park. After the tickets were bought, my wife started texting on her phone a lot. I didn't want to bug her. I was pretty sure she was just making arrangements and chatting with girls about the upcoming vacation. I texted my friends about it, of course. We just didn't have as much to say. I asked my wife for a copy of their itinerary, and she was caught off guard by my request. She said she would have to edit it because she mixed up the dates on the first draft. Once she fixed it, she gave me one of the printouts. It was a bunch of girly activities like yoga, shopping, yogurt treats, hiking, and restaurants. Well, fast forward to 3 days into our 6-day vacation. I missed her a lot. I was having fun, but suddenly 6 days felt like way too long. To make matters worse, my wife stopped responding to me. It really made me worry. I told my friends about it, and they of course told me to just relax and enjoy my time away in a new place. I did, for another day. But my wife was responding really weirdly to my texts. It was like she didn't care what I had to say, and only responded because she had to. I felt terrible, and I was worried. My wife's itinerary placed her group at a restaurant that night for dinner exactly 6 hours away from my friends and I. I started driving there at 1 p.m., so I'd get there by 7. When I got there, I found all of my wife's friends. They were shocked to see me. I asked them where my wife was, and they told me the worst news ever. She left them to meet up with someone else. I collapsed onto one of the chairs by their table, and they offered me even more information. They said she'd been on her phone until this morning, when she left before anyone woke up. She only texted them to say she wouldn't be back until late. I asked if she said anything else about who she was meeting or where she was going. Finally, one of her friends gave me a tiny piece of paper. She said it was for safety reasons, because my wife didn't want to go somewhere without someone knowing. It was an address. This friend added that my wife didn't want her to tell anyone, especially not me, where she was going, and this was only if she didn't come back in time for the flight home. Seeing as I showed up unexpectedly and concerned, this friend was persuaded to tell me the truth. I thanked her and ran out to my car. She caught up to me and asked if she could tag along. I agreed. I needed someone else to balance out my panic. Her name was Jade, and she told me about her family, hobbies, and work. It was a great distraction, but as soon as we got to the address, I was worried again. It was someone's house. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but it was only 8 p.m. Just before 9 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. A man got out of the driver's seat, and my wife got out of the passenger seat. I got out, followed by Jade, and called out, "Hey, honey." She jumped and turned to see me. Her mouth was hanging open, and she was infuriated. She immediately asked what I was doing there and why I was with Jade. I told her she came with me for emotional support because I wasn't sure what I was going to find. I looked at the man I had never seen before and asked who he was. He boldly said he was my wife's lifelong friend and new lover. I punched him in the face. My wife screamed and got closer to him. She yelled that he didn't know we were married. I asked her whose fault that was. He didn't know because she didn't want him to know. I asked if she planned for this the whole time, and she refused to answer me, even having the nerve to say I shouldn't be there. She looked at Jade and blamed her for being a snitch. I stepped in and said she only told me because she shared my concern, and I drove 6 hours to find her. This trip was supposed to renew our intimacy and give my wife a chance to miss me as she thought fondly of us, but instead, she used this time to meet up with a man from her past. I told her she wasn't welcome back at her home, and we were over. I trusted her to remain loyal and use this time to benefit our relationship, and she chose to destroy it. I couldn't believe it. After all this ranting, her bold lover started cursing at Jade and I, demanding we leave. He encouraged her to get in the house. She made eye contact with me for no more than 4 seconds before saying she was sorry and following him into the house. 4 seconds was all the deliberation it took for my wife to leave me standing in another man's yard. 4 seconds out of 18 years. I got back in the car with Jade and started driving back to the restaurant. She apologized for me having to go through all of this. She said she wanted to keep me company when I got home if that was okay, and I graciously accepted. After she got back to her car, I started the long car ride home. I called my twin sons and guy friends to tell them what was going on. They were extremely sympathetic and flocked to my side for emotional support. 3 weeks after I got home, Jade was visiting me at least twice a week. I appreciated her a lot, just as much as I appreciated my sons and friends because they continued checking up with me over the phone or in person. My sons told me they could never see Mom in the same light again. They kept in touch with her over the phone, but they dedicated themselves to their college studies and didn't consider changing their lives to help her in any way. One of my wife's mutual friends told Jade that her AP dumped her after 4 months for being too clingy. That had to hurt so bad. She was used to being married for 18 years. It's no wonder she was clingy to him. She probably wanted to be assured emotionally that she made the right decision, but that only made him leave her. I wondered what she was going to do with her life now, but I didn't try very hard to find out. An entire year later, I checked my old email address and found that my wife had been sending me emails weekly that entire time. The messages ranged from extremely angry with me to completely desperate for my response and love. I was honestly relieved I didn't find these messages until a year later, because by now I was romantically involved with Jade and wasn't tempted to take my wife back after her infidelity. I hope this story encourages people not to cheat. I hope it encourages people who are going through betrayal to know it's really okay. It's not the end of the world, and life goes on. Even though my wife's world turned upside down, she still had another chance to change her ways and make herself a better woman. Wow, OP. I am so sorry you had to endure the betrayal of your lifelong partner. You came out of your comfort zone for the chance to improve your marriage, and your wife made the selfish decision to meet with another man. I am sorry your wife didn't understand how beneficial and worthwhile it would have been to rekindle the flame in your long, successful marriage. She chose to sacrifice the father of her children, the man she spent 18 years with, for a fling that only lasted 4 months. Please, people, do not do what this woman did. She probably told AP her pity story about how her sex life was boring now and added that she was about to be in town for a few days. All AP heard was that he could have sex, probably more than once, with a woman he didn't have to commit to. Who knows what he promised her at the time, but it seems like as soon as she made the jump and switched men in her life, AP proved he wouldn't provide her the stability she was accustomed to. The lesson here is not to have sex with anyone who isn't your long-term companion. Sex is intended to be a sacred expression of love and commitment, but when it's had with the wrong people at the wrong time, it brings trouble. The best way to spice up your love life with a long-term spouse is communication. Sexy and out of the ordinary communication. You probably know what your spouse enjoys, so focus completely on that. Become a selfless fiend for what they crave and you'll surprise the both of you. If you aren't sure what to say, ask them about it or just let them know you're gonna try some new pillow talk. Thank you for sharing this story. Now let's get into today's second story. Today I'm going to tell you all about one crazy life-changing event that happened to me. It all started when I got a phone call halfway through my workday. My wife, 27, and I, 33, were married for 6 years at this point and she had been looking for a job for a year. She earned a small amount of money by making crafts and selling them on Etsy. I didn't want her to feel rushed or forced to get a job she hated. She'd already been through a really crappy childhood, so I only ever wanted to motivate her and make her feel safe. Our relationship seemed wonderful to me. She would get depressed sometimes, and I knew it was because of painful memories of the past. I asked her what was on her mind at least once a day, but much of the time she didn't say anything. When she did, it wasn't anything I could help with or didn't already know. So on this particular day at work, I got a phone call from the police department of the next county over. I was confused but listened as he explained that he had no choice but to arrest my wife today. Understandably, I freaked out. I asked him what the hell happened and what was going on. He said they received several calls about a woman setting a car on fire in one of the residential neighborhoods. My first thought was that there was no way it was my wife, but he verified her name and phone number and said they had possession of her car. I was absolutely mind-effed. I asked if she gave any statement, the reason for being there, or an explanation, and he said so far she was unwilling to talk to them. I asked if she was allowed to call me and instead he asked me to come in person to talk to her. I agreed. When I got there, they had me sit in the interview room with her. Her expression went from hardened and angry to soft and defeated. She covered her face with her hands. I asked her what the heck happened. I needed to know because I could not figure this out. She whispered that she couldn't tell me. I asked why. She said it was because we were being recorded and I wouldn't want to know. I said she was wrong. I wanted to know and she was apparently caught red-handed, so the only thing left to do was explain herself. She sat up, revealing her reddened and depressed face. She said she was setting fire to her ex's car because he cheated on her. After I let this sink in a bit, I asked her how long ago this happened and why seek revenge now. She really didn't want to answer me anymore, but I was her husband. She was in a police station. Her options were limited. After breathing a lot and crying, she told me he cheated on her last night. I said what, and she went on to explain that she'd been seeing him for a few months while I was at work. I could not believe what I was hearing. The cops were gonna have a ball watching this drama unfold, so I clarified that she was seeing AP behind my back, and when she found out he cheated on her last night, she decided to set his car on fire in broad daylight. After hearing my words, she looked like a shell of a woman. I told her I was ashamed to be her husband. She exposed her own affair by losing any self-control or responsibility she had left. I told her we were over and left the police station. I got a few sorry looks from some of the officers. My wife freaked out. She could only call people with permission from the cops, so the next person she called was her grandmother who raised her. Her grandmother actually thought it was a scam call and didn't look into it any further for another 3 weeks. Then she was finally contacted and paid my wife's bail. In order to afford it, she had to take out a loan. This was just the start of my wife's consequences. After she was out of jail, she tried to call me over and over again. After receiving 15 calls in one day, I finally answered it. She begged me to hear her out and at least meet her for coffee. She said it was the least I could do after the ordeal she'd been through, and our 6-year relationship deserved one more chance of survival. I laughed a good hearty laugh. I told her our 6-year relationship was over, dead in the past. I only kept that relationship with her in good faith that she would never go behind my back and sleep with another man. Not only did she do that, but she also jumped at criminal activity by setting his car on fire. She wailed and sobbed into the phone like it was her lifeline. I told her she made the decision to go behind my back, and anyone should know it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. I just got lucky because her idiotic actions did the work for me. I wished her luck in whatever she tries to do next with her life. As I said that, she started screaming for me not to hang up, but I did. Her aunt contacted me 4 months later. She asked if she could bring a truck over to get my ex's belongings. I said that was fine, and she went on to explain that my ex's grandmother passed away and the house was in foreclosure. So my ex was moving in with her and I'd finally get her crappy belongings out of my house. That sounded fine to me. I did wonder how she was holding up, but I didn't ask. By this point, I started seeing another woman and did not want to give any false hope by asking questions. I hope my story encourages everyone not to cheat on their partner. There are 2 things that helped me get through this ordeal the most. The first was exercising daily. I didn't want to do it, but I forced myself to use my muscles until I could feel the burn. It helped me to get out built-up anger and turn my attitude around for the better. I wasn't feeling down on myself. I was feeling positive and capable. The second thing I did was show myself love and care by doing what I wanted. Most of the time it was listening to music and dancing. Other times it was reading, watching TV, drawing, playing music, or going for a walk. OP, I am so sorry your wife went behind your back for months to sleep with another man. I'm sorry that you found out about her arrest for setting a car on fire. I can only imagine the shock you felt as her husband. This just goes to show that sometimes spouses cannot control or predict their partner's actions. You may think you know someone as well as you possibly can, but they could have so much pain and smothered emotion from their past that it comes out in a most unpredictable way. When this happens, please do not blame yourself. You can't possibly know or control what someone else is thinking or doing. Even more importantly, their disregard for you and the consequences they'll bring does not determine your self-worth. It simply means that they had pain and emotions they did not know how to handle or resolve. It means they made very poor decisions because of their pain and perception of things. As humans, we are all nothing more than a combination of several faculties working together, and when we let something that's ultimately meaningless affect how we behave and treat others, that's a mistake that will undoubtedly cause a ripple effect. I wish you the best of luck in life. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.